Good morning. Thank you all for coming this week again. Let's start with a brief recap of last week, refresh where we are, what we've talked about. We've hopped around a lot, I know. Thanks for your patience, just kind of coming, and wherever the conversation takes us, we've kind of gone. Last week, we talked about the value of shared leadership in your community groups, about how, allowing people to have a role and being participants and not just attendees can really help add some depth to your community group. When we talk about living in community, when we talk about ministry in general, people don't necessarily feel great if they think that they're the charity case. There's a huge value in a blessing in letting and encouraging people to use their gifts and be a real participant and bring something to your community. So this week we'll kind of take that another step forward in that, not only is it very valuable for everybody in your group to have some level of participation in that it adds depth to your group, but it's also a big help to you. Initially, it might take a little more work on your part to make sure you're allowing opportunities for people to serve and use their gifts in your group. But down the road, that's going to profit everybody, you and your family included. This week we had, Heather had to take off for a little bit. Her mom had a surgery, and so she went down to Corbin for a couple days to stay with her and help her recover, and that was, Friday night? So Friday night, it was just me and the kiddos, and we always have a good time, but this night in particular, I don't know if you have one of those nights where it's like everything just goes perfect. Like I had the three of them, and I get home from work, we have dinner, we just go hang out and we play all evening, and we have a great time. They march off to bed just perfectly. I'm like, go brush your teeth, wash your faces, get in bed, and they go. And you're like, this is awesome. And then I've got them to bed at like 7:30. When Heather's gone, they go to bed extra early. It's just something they like to do. I don't know. A treat with Dad, exactly. So they go to bed very early, and I'm like, all right, I'm just going to hang out and wait for them to go to sleep. And then I'm like, I'm going to take this time to go outside, and I've got a little shed in the backyard where I've got a lot of my tools so I can tinker and work on some projects. I'm like, I'm going to do nothing of value tonight. I'm just going to chill and relax and go out there and tinker on some projects. So I go out into the shed, and I'm just tinkering and working around until I look outside, and I'm like, oh, wow, it's really dark. I look down at my phone, I'm like, oh, it's 10 o'clock. I should probably get inside, get cleaned up. And as I'm walking inside, I'm just thinking, man, what an awesome night. Just hanging out with my kids, just chilling. And about that time, as I'm getting teary-eyed thinking about how awesome my evening has been, I reach the back door and realize I have locked myself out. And I do the check. There are no keys to be found anywhere. And I go to look for the spare key, and of course, the spare key's for the deadbolt, and I had locked the other lock on the door, so it was of no value. I climb on the air conditioning unit and reach up to the window on the second story that I usually keep unlocked in case I do this, since this does happen on occasion, only to find out, I'd been gone a couple weeks ago, and Heather had locked it up. So I drop down, and I do the only reasonable option I have left. I absolutely terrorize my children in a way that they will remember forever. Because there's no way in. It's either break a window or wake the kids up. So Parker's window sits like this far from his face where he sleeps. And so I'm like, there's just nothing to be done. Now, it doesn't help that this is all out in the front yard, in the front of the neighborhood, where every neighbor can see. Take my flashlight, shine it through the window, bang on the window. They don't wake up, bang on it some more, yelling their name, like, somebody get up. And I don't know how long that they cried in terror, before one of them had just the bravery to peek out the window and see what was going on. So I finally got Parker's attention. He calmed down and was able to communicate through screaming that the whole neighborhood could hear that, hey, I locked myself out. Can you let me in? So he comes to the door, and then we have to have lots of, cuddling time afterwards, and it's okay. And if anybody else does that at your window, don't let them in the house. So I tell that story to say, you have those moments in life where you're just on a high, where you're like, everything is going perfect, it's great, and then all of a sudden, something little happens and just throws you for a loop. And when we talk about C groups, that analogy is going to fit perfectly. Life is messy. We are messy. There's going to be, and I hope for you, the bulk of your time as C group facilitators, as you look back on it, is just a rejuvenating time, a time that you look forward to, that you love. But there are going to be times that things happen that just completely throw you for a loop. And so that's what we're going to talk through today, is just some ways to help us as hosts, help us as facilitators, to be prepared for the struggles, the things that happen that you don't expect, how you can prepare yourselves, your family, to deal with that, and also when things get above your level to deal with, who do you go to talk to about it, and how do you make sure you don't go there on your own. So, but to open it up, I got to ask, I shared my funny stories. I've got a million of them from C group time. I could go on for a full hour, but I'll spare you that. But I want to hear some. Try to get it under a minute. But do you have any C group stories where you came in one night and things did not go as expected, or something crazy happened? Think over your story. I'll give you another one while you're thinking. Many of you know me well. I keep a lot of weird animals. The cat's out of the bag on that. I have a really cool saltwater aquarium. I thought was a genius idea to put that in my kids' room. I've bartered and traded over the years. I like getting good deals, so I'll find people who are getting rid of aquariums. I'll get all their stuff. The end result is I've got a really cool aquarium in the boys' room that at this point, it probably has over $1,000 worth of rare coral and fish in it. Again, accumulated over time, I got from people. So I love that thing. And why I put it in the boys' room, I don't know. But I walked in after a C group one evening, and the entire thing, the boys have a tool, a little tool set, a fake one. Every tool, there were 50 tools, was in the aquarium. Battery-powered tools as well. And it's a saltwater aquarium, so that eats everything and does great things to electronic toys. It was so full with toys, you could see fish smeared up against the side of the glass. And the water is almost overflowing. So I had to tell myself, this is just an aquarium. It's not that big a deal. But it was one of those moments, I can't believe that happened. But that's a fairly tame story. But what about you guys? Have you ever had a C group night where it did not go as expected? Good, crazy story? All right, let's hear it.
All right, so
We got nothing. Be like, Chris, come on, sermon illustration. Yeah. Come up with it. Impromptu. There are some of them that now you laugh at them. Yeah. But in that moment, oh man, the frustration hits, the deep breaths are required. And I don't say these things to scare you, but it's an acknowledgement of, if you live in community, these are things that you're going to have to be prepared for. One of the biggest ones I struggled with was, again, my kid at a C group night. My son, at the time, who was all of 20 pounds, decided he could throw a rock as fast as a professional baseball player and cracked a little girl's forehead, and she had to have several stitches at a C group. And just, for me, the struggle that Heather and I had with that, just like, oh man, we felt so horrible. And it was kind of a different side of it. There are the times that I'm frustrated with something that happens to my house or to my stuff, but then to have that at somebody else's house, on just hurt somebody else's kid, and just the gut wrench that was. She wound up being okay, and it's fine, and her parents were more gracious than we could ever ask for about that. But as you live in community, as you have people over in your house all the time, there's going to be little frustrations. There's going to be weeks that it's awesome, and then weeks that you are going to come in a little bit more drained than usual. And those little things that you can often overlook are going to grate on your nerves a little bit more. It's going to be something that you have to consciously think about. When we talk about kids in the house, right? I mean, Heather and I always had to remind ourselves, like at our house, our kids should be the most well-behaved because it's their house. They know the rules. They know the expectations better than anybody else's. So when other people's kids come over to our house, we've got to acknowledge they don't know the rules at our house. They don't know the boundaries. It's going to be more difficult for them to be obedient. It's going to be more difficult for them not to get into things that we don't necessarily want our kids getting into. It's a little bit different mindset. And that's kind of one side of it. Our personal feelings, the times that we're going through struggles and hosts or facilitators, and how we manage those feelings and are still full of grace and love to the people that come to our house. There's also the side of your C group as a whole may go through some struggles, right? I mean, when you live in community, you're kind of going through the highs together, and that's the awesome and the fun time, and it's a lot of what we focused on in this class, but there's also going to be some sharing of burdens. There's going to be times when you may have somebody in your group that has a terminal illness, or they have a death that's close in their family, or somebody has marital struggles. And as they share individually with people in your community, there's a weight that you feel of that and a sharing of that burden. There's all sorts of just highs and lows that you can go through in this. So what I want to do today is I'm just going to spend a little time talking about some of the things that I've learned that have been helpful to Heather and I as we have hosted and facilitated. And I just want you to start thinking about your mental preparation in that, like knowing that these things are going to come. How can you make sure, one, that you as a host and facilitator are spending the time in the Word that you need to, are walking with Christ, and being prepared for the struggles that will arise with living in community. And again, this is not to scare you, but it's a realization, and I want us to all remember that this is not a sign of success or failure of our group. If you are struggling with something or your group is going through a lull time, this is what's going to happen when you live in community. But as you look over your time as a C group facilitator, I am confident that you'll look back and remember those times that you rejoiced together. Remember the encouragement and looking forward to that time. And even when you're going through a tough time, the joys of having community and having people that can walk through that time with you. Just a hard and a shot. Yeah, that definitely this week hit hard for a lot of people. Just a Christian leader in the school and in the community like that so suddenly. So absolutely. I mean, that's part of living in community, and we talked about diverging from discussion and questions into real life, and it's those situations that pull us into that. And I think that's a good place to start, that the number one most practical recommendation that I can give to you is to just spend time praying for your C group. Pray for the families in your C group. Pray that they are growing closer to the Lord, that the Lord is drawing them close to them, that He is working in their lives. Pray for your family. Pray that they understand what it means for you all if you have children or if you're married, to have people in your home every week. And pray for the purpose of the group. Ask that the Lord will grow your community together, and that He would use your community to draw people closer to Him. Pray for you to have grace. Just ask the Lord to help you have grace, because, like I said, those majority of those weeks we're going to come in recharged and ready to go. But there's some weeks that when you're in a little different mood, you have a tendency to want to let those little things rub on your nerves. Pray that the Lord would just alter your focus, remind you of the purpose He has in the community, and the growth that He will foster in it. And I would just find some time to do that every week. Carve out whatever it is to make sure if you're going to make it a priority to facilitate or host a C group, that you are spending time in prayer for that group. And I hands down will say, for those at our house, that was the biggest difference maker for me. And I could see the difference in how the C group played out, depending on times when I was spending on my knees just praying for our group. Secondly, the thing that's super easy to say but harder to live out is we talk about our grace-filled value. Be grace-filled. Make sure that not only are you prayerfully asking the Holy Spirit to show you grace and help you to show that grace to others, but spend time making sure you're communicating that thought that you have to others in your community group. I found this, for me, a lot of times that I struggle with making sure other people could see and know that when something went a little wrong, that I wasn't upset about it, because sometimes I can just kind of turn expressionless in that time. But if my aquarium gets dumped full of toys, and I'm aggravated at that, or can I communicate and step out and say, like, that's not a big deal, and really make sure in my heart that it is okay, and I recognize the place that it's just a thing in my house, and that the people are more important to me than that. And to foster that thought process continually as you have people in your home. I would also encourage you to really communicate, first off, with your family. If you have kids, if you're married, talk about your community group. Talk about with your spouse what the expectations are for that community group. Are you going to spend time preparing your home? And if so, at what level are you going to prepare it for people to come over? That was discussions that Heather and I had to have early on as we hosted a lot. Is my expectation for what I thought the house needed to look like was maybe very different from what she thought it needed to look like. And even though that's a simple thing, like week in and week out as you do that, are you communicating with your spouse over something as simple as what the house looks like? Are you communicating what your goals are as a community group, both within your family and with your community group? There's a tendency with these. One of the great things about growing in community is that you become relaxed with one another, and it becomes easy, and that's a great thing. But also, don't become lax in your purpose in that. And I recognize fully that our C groups, even in this room, although we have a shared mission, and when we're looking to make people known, transformed, and sent in a big picture, that looks very different across our community groups, right? Some of our community groups are very much more peer-level community groups, where it is really a lot of mature believers on much the same life stage. And so I think communicating where you are as a C group to them, to let them know, like, okay, I want more shared leadership in this group because the maturity is there and the time is there. There are other C groups that may be a little more ministry end of the spectrum, where you're inviting and encouraging families that are either not believers or not as mature believers. So if that is your C group dynamic, are you communicating that, hey, we want to be, we're mission minded? Are you communicating that, we're here for you and we're having this discussion, but this is the purpose? So I'd really encourage you, and that takes a load off of you when you're continually communicating those expectations, because if you continue without that communication, you may wind up getting frustrated because your group isn't going in a direction that maybe you were hoping it would go. And also to be willing to see where the Lord leads your group. If you become more mission-minded, if you become a more mature group that is able to do a lot of service-related projects. So again, I don't want to put us all in the same area, but just make sure and be able to communicate. A very profitable thing that we've shifted to over the past few years is scheduling in a summer break. And I would encourage you to consider using that. Some of you may find the summertime is a better time for you to meet for your group, especially if you're kid heavy and you can meet and turn everybody out loose outside. But if you're feeling as a host or facilitator like, okay, it's kind of wearing on me to meet just year round, and the day in, the day out of this is becoming a little difficult, take some rest time before something happens and you get kind of too frustrated with anything. Take that break. Don't feel bad about it. Enjoy maybe one or two big summer outings and just do a big get together, a big meal, do a swim party, meet at Juniper Hills. But don't feel bad about taking those breaks, about using them. And I know that Heather and I found, some years we had groups that were really mature, and we had a lot of servant-minded people in that group, and we just loved to go on through the summer, to meet all summer. There were other times that our group was a little more ministry-minded. We had a lot of people that needed encouragement, a lot of people that were just struggling with busy schedules, and the expectation of community group every week was a lot. And we needed to take those breaks, both for us and for our group. So please, don't feel like that's something that you can't use. It's there for a reason. On that same line, I'm sorry, I got a really dry mouth tonight. I'm going to be sucking water. Like I said, there's a tendency for you to become very complacent with your group. And part of that is a good thing, that you get more comfortable with one another. You're comfortable sharing. You're having a good time. But also, I think it's important you remember to continue to be a constant evaluator of your group. Continue to look at what's going on and the people that are in there and strategize about how you can do things better. And that especially applies, again, to you as leaders. If you get something going on in your group that you are struggling with, that something, and that can be any part of that dynamic, whether it's maybe you're feeling the craziness of the kids is a little too much, and the way that you're doing childcare just isn't quite working. Or maybe you feel like, well, this discussion time right now is feeling a little less profitable, like nobody's really talking, we're asking the 10 questions, but it's not going anywhere. Or you're doing some other format and you're kind of just going, man, this is a little bit of a rub. It's not working the way we want it to. Evaluate that and try to change it. Try something different. For us, we had a C group in our house for 7 years, and I would dare say we never did the same thing for more than about 6 months at a time. There was some change in the format in that, and a lot of it, especially, again, if you have kids, your group dynamic changes as they age all the time. So if you need to switch up that format, don't feel bad about doing that. Just go for it and do it. And I mentioned last week, we talked about shared leadership, and this is a big portion of that playing in right here. I also want to give you an out and just be honest and say, like, This is awesome. I'm so glad that you all are serving as facilitators and hosts, but this doesn't have to be a forever thing. If it gets to a point where you are really noticing that you are losing enthusiasm, or you are going through a time in your life that it is just hard for your family to pour out in other people this way, it's okay to talk with the pastors, talk with your secret facilitator coach, and find a way to shift your community into another house or to another facilitator and ease your load a little bit. Maybe you need to do that for a long stretch. Maybe you need to do it for 2 or 3 months in the wintertime, one wintertime. There are lots of options, and I just want you to know that I don't want you to get to a place, if you've got some frustrations, that you just stay in it. And shared leadership in the group is going to help you be able to shift out if you need to. Whether you move, whether you need a break, or anything, if you have made yourself the hub of your community group, where if you pull yourself out, it kind of all falls apart, that's going to be a real struggle when you try to leave. And you may have some guilt over the way it falls out. But I'm just encouraging you to try to take those steps early on to develop that shared leadership. So if that time comes that you need to step away, that your community can persist without you. That you've built it around community and you've built it around Christ and a purpose, and it's not just built around you. You know, if any of you guys had to do like challenge courses, like a low ropes course where you have somebody out and do like a team building exercise, y'all done that anywhere? I used to teach a lot of those classes. Like I'd go do 4-H camps and I'd do the low rope courses and the team building courses. And because I did that for several years, I have a real struggle with my attitude when I have to participate in them. Because I kind of like, all right, I've done this game before. You know, and they're the ones where like they build a little spider web in between 2 trees, and each person in your group, you have to carry them through the spider web without touching the lines, or you lose a point, and it gets just a hair too touchy-feely for your comfort with people that you don't know that well. And I had to do one of those with a group about 8 months ago. I had to be a participant. And I was struggling because I'm like, all right, I know the tricks to all these games. I've seen this before. And then they did one that I haven't done before, where there's this maze of lines in between all these trees. And so the guy's like, okay, I want you to go grab one of these lines. And so you grab the line anywhere, and you hang on to it, and he puts a blindfold on you. And he's like, okay, now you're all 15 of you blindfolded in this little area. I want you to walk along the string until you find the end of the maze. And so you're only allowed to ask 2 questions. 1, you can ask for help if you really need it, or 2, you can ask me, am I at the end of the maze? So I'm like, oh, geez. So I grab the line, the guy blindfolds me, and I'm over it. Like, I'm just like, and I'm like, well, I saw this thing. There's no end to this. So I immediately raised my hand, and the guy comes over, and I was like, can you help me? And he's like, whispers in my ear and carries me over to the side. He's like, good job, man. That's the fastest anybody's ever got out of this thing. And one poor sap, he let roam around the maze asking, am I at the end? This guy stood out there for like 30 minutes while the rest of us laughed at him. But the point of his exercise was ask for help when you need it. And it may have been the dumbest low ropes exercise I have ever seen. And everybody's like, oh, that's so good, Paul, you asked for help. And I didn't tell him I was just mad at life for being out there. So I took the accolades. But I say that to get here. Don't be afraid to ask for help in this. All right? The last thing I want you to think is that you're out there hosting and facilitating on your own in this. And there is a structure to help you get the support you need if you go through a time or run into a situation that's a little bit more than you can bear. So I would start with the hierarchy here in that you're encouraged to have an assistant facilitator in your group. And I'd encourage you, whether you do that informally or formally, whatever you want to do, but have somebody in your group that you can really count on. One, to help you serve, and two, I call it the strategy person. Like, can you talk with them and say, hey, what can we do better? Or can you look at what's going on and observe our hosting and my facilitation skills and give me some encouragement, some feedback? And overall, just some prayer support in your group as well. That assistant facilitator role can be enormous for you. And it's also, again, circling back, it's part to training up your replacement. If you either, one, have to step out for whatever reason, or two, you are encouraging multiplication in your group. That's what that assistant facilitator role is for. Just to share, for us, I rarely did that formally. It was usually informally, but I did have in my head, like, this is a couple that I really want to make sure that I'm talking with about the strategy of C Group, like talking about, like, what's our purpose? Are people growing closer to the Lord? Are people growing closer to each other? What do we need to do better? Secondly, you have community group coaches. Every community group should have one. And they should have hopefully reached out to you by now. I would encourage you to use them. This is a new thing that we're trying, and this is simply because as we get more and more community groups stacked up, our pastors, it's hard for them to meet with everybody regularly. I see some people going, somebody's supposed to, what? I know that I am one, and I haven't always done the best at reaching out, but you all should have one, and if you don't know who it is, talk to me afterwards, and I'll make sure that we circle in. But at the same time, know that the coach role is in development, and so I would encourage you to also reach out to your coach. The role of the coach, in my mind, is really about helping you strategize and praying with you about your C group. That is really their role. And sometimes you may come to them and be like, I just need suggestions about what I can do. Even if you don't, even if everything's going great, just sit down, talk strategy with them sometime. Tell them what's going on with your group so they've got an idea of how you're doing, the health. That's a great asset for you all. And I'd start there when if you have any struggles, again, or if things are going great, still be in communication with that coach and talk to them. All of the coaches right now, I believe there's 6 of them, have hosted C groups for at least a couple years. And they're not like the counselor for you. They're just a strategizing person for you to talk to. And be mindful of, and when I say strategizing and talking about the purpose of your group and talking through struggles that you all are having, be mindful of not turning that into gossip about, well, so-and-so just really annoys me. That's an easy line to cross into. But again, work on being grace-filled and loving, and don't be afraid to sit down with those coaches and spend some time talking strategy. For us, that's something that I always did. Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good point, is that it's not going to work well if you just come to your coach when something's not going well. I'd encourage you to try to foster that relationship as they reach out to you. Spend some time just talking to them, sharing the great things that are going on in your C group, the successes that are happening. So that's a great follow-up question. So your coaches, the assimilation. There is a separate group who are working on assimilation. So Matt Morvay, that's a lot of his role, and as new people come in. But Barry Herndon is the one that will hopefully be reaching out to you saying, hey, here's some people that may fit well into your C group. Can you reach out to them? So if people are filling out a bulletin slip saying, I want to be in a C group or I want to be in community, they're going to, at some point, I don't know all the processes, you can ask Matt Morvay, get to a point where Barry will be reaching out to you saying, hey, can you reach out to this person? And so if you're a small group and you're like, we really are really looking for more people, then I would reach out to Barry Herndon. And this is I think the 1 week they didn't make it, so he could tell you more. But we'll catch him next week and let him share a few minutes about what that assimilation process looks like. But again, if you're looking for people, I'd certainly reach out to him, especially as we consider, as we look geographically spreading out a little bit. So your two or three resources right there: your assistant facilitators, your coaches. You've got Barry and Matt working on assimilation and being a resource to get people into your group. And then the next line is your pastoral staff. And again, not saying these things to scare you, but just to prepare you if you come across this in your community groups. There may be times that somebody in your group is dealing with a situation that is beyond your ability to encourage them, and they need some more counseling. And I not only would say look for those opportunities, but I encourage you, just reach out to your pastors on them. And I'll say we ran into quite a few situations like that over the years where a couple would be experiencing some serious marital issues, and it would be just a struggle for them, and in some cases they were very vocal with the group about it, which was an interesting dynamic, and it was something that I had to immediately recognize and say, okay, go talk to the pastor, any of the pastoral staff, and say, okay, what do you think about this? What should I be doing as encouragement to them? What should I be doing in terms of shepherding the community who's hearing about this? Chris is technically kind of over the C group program, but don't feel like he's the guy you've got to go to. Like if you are having, if anybody in your group is going through a super difficult time, you can go to any of the pastors that you would think would resonate well with that individual. Just give them a call and stop by and chat. If somebody is coming to you with a specific problem like this, I say especially because the one I ran into most was on multiple occasions were some serious marital issues. I would encourage you to try to make sure that in that conversation, you do not ask them, you specifically tell them, I really feel like I want to bring one of the pastors in to have this discussion with you. I say don't ask it, because if you ask and say, are you okay if I share this one with one of the pastors, and then they say no, you're in a little difficult spot. But I mean, we've had all sorts of circumstances, and it's difficult when it's a close friend, somebody you've lived in community group, to be able to say, okay, like you need more help than I can give you in this. And it would be beneficial if you talk to one of the pastoral staff. But I'd be prepared for that. That may come up. We had one situation where there was a couple that really had some struggles, and they wound up getting a divorce. And it was really difficult on everyone. I mean, absolutely catastrophic for their family, obviously, and then also it weighed heavy on our community group, and it was tough. And at that point, they had moved on from our church and had moved elsewhere, and actually requested one of the pastoral staff to come into our community group and just talk through a few things. So again, those resources are available to you, and I really encourage you to take advantage of them when those situations arise. Your pastors want to know what's going on, and they want to be an encouragement to the people here at Buck Run. And finally, I hope this situation doesn't arise, but with as many community groups as that we have, there is the real potential that somebody shares with you serious allegations of physical abuse or sexual abuse on some level. And Herschel is great about reminding us of this. He tells it to the deacons all the time. But as facilitators who are living life with people, if somebody brings any of those accusations to you and you have any reasonable belief of their accuracy, and I know that's vague, but if you do, you need to go to the police with it. And it sounds silly to need to say, because when we sit here in the room, you're like, oh, no kidding. But the reality is that is really, really tough when it is somebody close to you and they are sharing something in confidence. That is tough. After you have talked to the police about that, I encourage you to then share it with the pastoral staff. But if you've got that reasonable belief, then that's where you need to go with it. And again, it'll be really tempting if that situation comes up to keep it in and feel guilt about betraying trust and telling people and tell them, like, this is what I need to do. But in some cases, you're illegally obligated to do that. So, especially. And I've never had that happen. We never have. We had a case where it was very, very close. But it turns out some of the accusations were very, very exaggerated, and we kind of saw that. But be mindful of that, and be mindful of just what you need to do if that situation comes up. And again, I hope and pray that it doesn't. So as we wrap up, I know that we've kind of gotten substantially heavier as the course went on. But this is part of living in community. Life is messy. We are messy. And this is part of what you may encounter as you live life with other people. But I'll just share you this, and I don't share it with you to brag, but I share it with you to be an encouragement to you in that, our community group mission, glorify God by making and growing disciples in community. Be rooted in your purpose. When that tough time comes and you think about the long term of what the Lord is using, just the blessing of being used by Him to do in community. Again, not to brag, but as Heather and I looked back over the 7 years that we hosted community groups at our house, as we started counting up the numbers, we got well over 150 people that at some point, and not just come for a visit, but some of them come for years, who not only did we get time to serve, but who were a huge blessing to us and our family, who encouraged us in our spiritual growth, who challenged us. Some of them now are serving as missionaries on the other side of the world. They're scattered all over the U.S. Multiplication is something we'll discuss next week. It is hard and it is a challenge, but I know, at least from those at our house, there's some third generation groups that have come from the multiplications. So I'm telling you, it's worth it. It is so worth it. And you're going to have the little frustrations along the road. You're going to have the hard times that you as a community work together and you band together around. But it's worth it. And I look back, and it's funny, even, my kids, to see what those relationships have meant to them. And the fact that every week, week in and week out, it was a knowledge that we are going to always have people coming over to our home, not only that we're trying to serve, but who are serving and pouring into us. When we have something come up and we need an emergency babysitter, it's those people that we live in community with that are picking that up and giving us a hand. It's the times that that I've had men that I've lived in community group that have challenged me when I'm not living the way I should. And it's worth it. And finally, I want to encourage you with this. As you do this over time, you're going to develop that natural community we talked about. Right? We started with this very structured approach to community and talking about, these are the times, these are the discussion questions that you have. Over time, that's going to come supernatural. It's just going to be what happens. And there may be a little bit of you that goes, all right, we don't really need as much of the structure anymore. This just happens. We're just in community. And, if we don't meet on Sunday nights, that's okay. We'll have people over at our house week in and week out. And I know that I've fallen into that tendency from time to time. But I encourage you to remember the people that come to Buck Run that don't have that community or that are looking to it. Because we have got there slowly over time, and if you're there, you've built that community by being together on a weekly basis, by going through the tough times together, by growing together. But there's a lot of people in our church that don't have that depth of relationship yet in these smaller groups. And there are always, I pray that there are always going to be more people coming into our church that are new to the area, that are new believers, that are going to be looking for community. And so I encourage you, even as you become seasoned hosts and facilitators and you've got that depth of community, continue to look out and reach out and provide opportunities for others to join you who don't have it. Next week, we're going to jump into a little discussion on multiplication. And I know some of you have given it a try, so think through it this week if you have had a group that's multiplied, or if you have not, or you're just kind of curious about how it happens or what happens. Be prepared, think about some questions, some examples, some concerns that you have about that, and we'll be ready to talk about it. Before we close, any questions? I know I went over a lot this week, and it was a lot more of me talking than normal. But I just want to make sure you know the resources that you have available to you, and that you feel like if I have something that's really a struggle, I know who to go to with it. Any questions or final thoughts? That's awesome. Well, let me close with some prayer with that. Lord, I thank you for this time that we've had together to just talk about what it means to live in community. And I just ask, Lord, that you would use us as an encouragement, as a light to our community, to just share your love with the people around us and show them grace as you have shown us grace. And I ask that you be with the Hyatt family at this time with their loss, and what a tragedy it is. But I ask even more than that, that your glory would be known through it. And though I didn't know Mr. Hyatt, it just his life resonates in the community, and I can't imagine he'd want anything less than you to be glorified in this circumstance. And just help us to be an encouragement to others as they struggle with this, and help us to be ministry-minded and gospel-minded as we encourage others and we walk through them with this hard time. Lord, I pray that you be with our community groups. I thank you for the joy and just the amazing blessing it is to live in community with other believers. And I ask that as we do that, you would give us a joy in spending time with your people, and that we would be patient and loving and grace-filled as we allow people in our homes. And I ask that it would bring you glory. It's in your name that we pray. Amen.